The tragic story of Nick Reiner and the murder of his parents, Rob and Michelle Reiner, shocked the public not only because of its brutality, but because of the painful questions it raised about family, mental health, addiction, and hidden suffering. When the news first emerged, many people struggled to believe what they were reading. Rob and Michelle Reiner were described as caring, supportive parents who had spent years trying to help their troubled son. They were found brutally stabbed in their own home, attacked in the very place that should have been the safest for them. The idea that their own biological son was responsible felt impossible for many to accept. People ask the same questions again and again. How could a child turn against his parents in such a violent way? How could years of love, support, and financial help end in such horror? To understand what happened, it is important to look beyond the crime itself and carefully examine the long and complicated road that led to that night. This was not a sudden event that appeared out of nowhere. Instead, it was the result of many years of emotional pain, addiction, mental illness, and unresolved conflict slowly building beneath the surface. Nick Reiner's struggles reportedly began during his teenage years, when he was still very young and emotionally vulnerable. At around the age of 15, he was first exposed to drugs, including heroin. What may have started as experimentation quickly turned into a powerful addiction that took control of his life. Addiction does not only damage the body, it slowly changes the way a person thinks, feels, and reacts to the world. Over time, Nick's drug use became the center of his existence. School, work, relationships, and personal goals faded into the background. Even though he came from a wealthy and well-connected family, money and privilege could not protect him from the grip of addiction. In fact, having access to resources sometimes made it easier for the cycle to continue, as treatment attempts were followed by relapse after relapse. According to reports, Nick entered rehabilitation programs many times, possibly more than a dozen. Each time, there was hope that this attempt would be different. Each time, that hope slowly faded as addiction pulled him back. As the years passed, the emotional toll of repeated failure became heavier. Nick reportedly began to feel ashamed, frustrated, and deeply disappointed in himself. He struggled with feelings of worthlessness, believing he could never live up to expectations or compare himself to others around him. Addiction often isolates people, even when they are surrounded by family. Despite his parents' constant efforts to help him, Nick's internal world became darker and more unstable. There were periods when he left home and lived on the streets, moving from state to state, sleeping in parks, on sidewalks, and in unsafe places. These years of homelessness were not only physically dangerous, but emotionally damaging. Hunger, cold nights, fear, and repeated overdoses reportedly became part of his daily reality. Living in survival mode for so long can harden a person emotionally and weaken their ability to cope with stress or disappointment. During these difficult years, Nick's relationship with his parents became complicated. Rob and Michelle Reiner continued to help him financially and emotionally. But addiction can twist how support is perceived. What parents see as love and protection, a person struggling with addiction may see as control or pressure. This gap in understanding can quietly grow wider over time. Nick reportedly resented rules, treatment centers, and boundaries placed on him. He often resisted sobriety, disliked structure, and sometimes acted out in destructive ways. At certain moments, there appeared to be hope. For a short time, Nick managed to stay sober and even worked with his father on a film project, which seemed like a turning point. He reportedly spoke about wanting a different life and being tired of living on the streets. Unfortunately, these moments of progress did not last. By 2018, reports indicate that he had relapsed again, returning to drug use and emotional instability. Over more than a decade, addiction reshaped Nick's personality and emotional responses. Drugs do not only dull pain, they also weaken empathy, patience, and impulse control. Over time, resentment can grow toward the very people trying to help. Nick's parents became closely involved in monitoring his behavior, encouraging treatment, and trying to limit his access to substances. While their actions were rooted in concern and love, Nick may have felt watched, judged, and trapped. By the time he returned to live with his parents shortly before the tragedy, his mental and emotional state was already deeply fragile. Years of addiction, failure, and inner conflict had left him struggling to regulate emotions or see situations clearly. This unstable foundation would soon collide with other dangerous factors, setting the stage for a devastating outcome. Alongside addiction, Nick Reiner was also reportedly suffering from severe mental illness, including schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is a complex condition that can deeply affect how a person perceives reality. It can cause hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, and emotional instability. People with this illness may struggle to separate what is real from what is imagined, especially during periods of stress or when medication is not properly balanced. When mental illness exists alongside long-term drug abuse, the effects can become far more dangerous. Drugs can worsen symptoms, interfere with treatment, and increase impulsive behavior. In Nick's case, years of substance use reportedly made his mental condition harder to control and more unpredictable. In the weeks leading up to the murders, Nick's psychiatric medication was reportedly changed or adjusted. Medication changes can be risky, especially for individuals with severe mental disorders. When the brain chemistry is suddenly altered, it can take time for the body and mind to adapt. During this adjustment period, symptoms can worsen instead of improving. Reports suggest that instead of stabilizing Nick, the medication changes may have triggered increased paranoia, confusion, and emotional volatility. Family members reportedly noticed alarming changes in his behavior. He became more confrontational, suspicious, and unpredictable. Small disagreements may have felt like major threats in his mind. Ordinary conversations could have been interpreted as attacks or attempts to control him. As his mental state deteriorated, Nick may have begun to experience delusions involving his parents. Delusions are deeply held beliefs that are not based in reality, but feel completely real to the person experiencing them. In such a state, Nick reportedly believed that his parents were controlling him, betraying him, or working against him. Acts of care, such as monitoring his behavior or encouraging treatment, may have been twisted in his mind into acts of oppression. This is one of the most tragic aspects of severe mental illness. Love can be misinterpreted as harm, and safety can be seen as danger. Rob and Michelle Reiner, who were closest to Nick and most involved in his care, became the central figures in his distorted worldview. At the same time, financial stress added another dangerous layer to the situation. Nick had reportedly been financially dependent on his parents for many years. Addiction is expensive, and without stable employment, money becomes a constant source of anxiety. Reports and speculations suggest that Rob and Michelle may have recently limited Nick's access to money in an effort to force sobriety and protect him from further harm. From a parental perspective, this decision made sense. However, in Nick's unstable mental state, it may have felt like abandonment or punishment. In moments of intense craving and psychological distress, access to money may have felt like the difference between relief and unbearable suffering. Instead of seeing his parents as caregivers, Nick may have come to view them as obstacles, standing between him and what he believed he needed to survive. When mental illness, addiction, and financial pressure collide, rational thinking often disappears. The brain becomes focused on perceived threats and immediate relief. Empathy, long-term thinking, and emotional regulation are severely weakened. In this state, Nick may have felt trapped, desperate, and overwhelmed. His inner world was reportedly filled with fear, anger, and confusion. The boundaries that normally prevent violence were eroded by years of substance abuse and mental instability. What might have once been unthinkable slowly became possible within his distorted perception of reality. It is important to understand that mental illness does not automatically lead to violence, and most people with schizophrenia are not dangerous. However, when symptoms are severe, untreated, or combined with drugs, the risk of unpredictable behavior increases. In Nick's case, the lack of stability, recent medication changes, and emotional stress may have pushed him into a psychological crisis. Family members and doctors reportedly tried to help him regain control, but time was not on their side. The situation escalated faster than anyone expected, and the warning signs, though present, were not enough to prevent the tragedy that followed. The night of the murders represented the breaking point of many years of unresolved struggle. In a mind overwhelmed by delusions, fear, and desperation, Nick reportedly lost the ability to recognize his parents as the people who loved and protected him. Instead, they became symbols of control, frustration, and perceived threat. This tragic transformation of perception turned a family home into the scene of unimaginable violence. What happened next was not the result of a single cause, but the devastating outcome of many forces colliding at once. When examining this case as a whole, it becomes clear that the murder of Rob and Michelle Reiner cannot be explained by one simple reason. Instead, it was the result of a slow buildup of emotional pain, psychological damage, and unresolved conflict that reached a tragic climax. Addiction weakened Nick Reiner's ability to cope with stress and disappointment. Mental illness distorted his perception of reality and fueled paranoia. Financial pressure intensified feelings of desperation and resentment. Together, these factors formed a dangerous psychological storm. Each element fed into the others, creating a cycle that became harder to escape with each passing year. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of this case is the role of family love. Rob and Michelle Reiner reportedly spent years trying to help their son. They provided financial support